So there was a brief introduction on Jeet Tayil, and I would like to give you a brief introduction by reading from his book Narcopolis, the first novel of Jeet Tayil. Initially, I will read the first passage from a Malayalam translation, and then Jeet will read the English one. This book is translated by Balasundaram.
I just want to say that the section that Shyam is going to read right now is actually the prologue, which is a sentence that runs for 6 pages.
Yeah.
But in this translation, for some mysterious and unknown reason, the translator made it many sentences. So he's going to stop, he's going to read and then stop at the first full stop.
ആമുഖമായി ചിലത്. ബോംബെ എന്ന പേരുമാറ്റി ശസ്ത്രക്രിയയിലൂടെ മുഖം മാറ്റി ചരിത്രം മായ്ച്ചു കളഞ്ഞ തലസ്ഥാനമാണ് ഈ കഥയിലെ കഥാനായകൻ അഥവാ നായിക എന്നിരിക്കെ കഥ പറയുന്നത് ഞാനാണെങ്കിലും ഈ ഞാൻ ആരെന്ന് നിങ്ങൾക്കറിഞ്ഞുകൂടാത്തതിനാൽ പറയട്ടെ. ഞാൻ ആരെന്ന വിഷയത്തിലേക്ക് കടക്കാൻ നമുക്ക് ധാരാളം സമയം ബാക്കിയുണ്ട്. ധൃതി വയ്ക്കാതെ വിളക്കു തെളിയിച്ച് നിലാവിലേക്ക് ജനലു തുറന്ന് തകർന്നുപോയ മഹാനഗരത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് സ്വപ്നം കാണാൻ ഇനിയും ഏറെ സമയമുണ്ട്. നേരം വെളുക്കുന്നതുവരെ എന്നുവച്ചാൽ പകൽ അതിൻ്റെ പണികളിൽ ഏർപ്പെടുന്നതോടെ ഞാൻ ഇത് അവസാനിപ്പിക്കും. കാരണം സൂര്യപ്രകാശത്തിൽ പ്രേതധൂളി പോലെ തിരോഭവിക്കുന്ന രാക്കഥകളാണ് ഇതെല്ലാം എന്നുകൊണ്ടുതന്നെ അല്പം ക്ഷമിക്കൂ. ഇതൊന്ന് കത്തിച്ചു തരൂ. അതേ വിളക്കിനു നേരെ നേരെ പിടിക്കൂ. വിളക്കിനു നേരെ എന്നെ താങ്ങി നിർത്തൂ. വിളക്കിനു നേരെ നേരെ. ആ ശരി, പതുക്കെ ഒരു പുകയെടുക്കട്ടെ. ഒന്ന് തുടങ്ങിക്കിട്ടാൻ സാവകാശം. ശ്വാസകോശങ്ങളിലേക്ക് കോരിയെടുക്കാൻ. ശരി. ഹാ ദൈവമേ, ഒന്നുകൂടെ മൂക്കിൻ്റെ ഉൾത്തടങ്ങളിലേക്ക് മധുരമുള്ള ഏതെങ്കിലും കുറച്ച് വായിലിട്ട് എന്നിട്ട് റഷീദിൽ വച്ച് ആദ്യമായി ഞാൻ പൈപ്പിൽ നിന്നും നീലപ്പുക തുന്നിയെടുക്കുന്നതും അതെൻ്റെ രക്തത്തിലേക്ക് കണ്ണിലേക്ക് എന്നിലേക്ക് പടരുന്നതും പിന്നെ ഞാൻ നീലയുടെ ലോകത്തേക്ക് വ്യാപരിക്കുന്നതും മുതൽ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലായി തുടങ്ങുമ്പോൾ കഥ പറയുന്നത് ആരെന്ന് ഇതാ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലായി തുടങ്ങുന്നു. എനിക്ക് പറയാനുള്ളത് എന്തെന്നാൽ ഈ നിമിഷം ഞാൻ എന്നു നിങ്ങൾ സങ്കല്പിക്കുന്ന ഞാൻ, ഈ വാക്കുകൾ ചിന്തിച്ച് രേഖപ്പെടുത്തുന്ന ഒരാൾ, കാലത്തെ യുക്തിയോടെ കൃത്യമായി ക്രമീകരിക്കുന്ന ഒരുവൻ, മുൻകൂട്ടി തയ്യാറാക്കിയ കാര്യപരിപാടി ഉള്ള ഒരാൾ, ഏതോ യന്ത്ര സംവിധാനത്തിൻ്റെ എഞ്ചിനീയർ ദൈവം, ആ ഞാനല്ല ഈ കഥ പറയുന്ന ഞാൻ. ആ ഞാൻ ഈ കഥ കേൾക്കുന്ന ഞാനാണ്. ഈ കഥയിൽ പറയപ്പെടുന്ന ഞാനാണ് ആ ഞാൻ. ഓർമ്മകൾ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഞാൻ. റഷീദിൽ വെച്ച് ആദ്യത്തെ പുകയെടുത്ത് എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു രൂപം മനസ്സിൽ ബാക്കി നിർത്താൻ കിണഞ്ഞത്, ഒരു മുഖം, പാട്ടിൻ്റെ ഒരു വരി, ഒരു മനുഷ്യ ശബ്ദം, കഴിഞ്ഞ കാലം എങ്ങനെയായിരുന്നു എന്ന് ചിന്തിച്ചത്, ഒരു വിദേശ രാജ്യത്തെ പ്രകാശവും ഭൂപ്രകൃതിയും ഭാവനാലോകവുമല്ല, ഒരിക്കൽ ജീവിച്ച് പിന്നീടൊരിക്കലും മടങ്ങിച്ചെല്ലാനാവാത്ത സ്ഥലം, ന്യൂയോർക്കിൽ വെച്ച് എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഞാൻ കുടുക്കിൽ അകപ്പെട്ടത്, നേരെയാക്കാൻ അവരെന്നെ ബോംബെയിലേക്ക് തിരിച്ചയച്ചത്, റഷീദ് ഞാൻ കണ്ടെത്തിയത്, ഒരു ഉച്ചയ്ക്ക് ഞാൻ ടാക്സി പിടിച്ച് മനുഷ്യൻ്റെയും മൃഗങ്ങളുടെയും വിസർജ്യവും ചപ്പുചവറുകളും നിറഞ്ഞ റോഡിലൂടെ കീറത്തുണി ചുറ്റി ദരിദ്രന്മാർ മുടന്തി നീങ്ങുകയും നിന്ന് തുറിച്ചു നോക്കവേ ഞാൻ റഷീദിലേക്ക് ചെന്നത്, അവരുടെ ദാരിദ്ര്യത്തിൽ അസാധാരണമായി ഞാനൊന്നും കാണാതിരുന്നത്, പൈപ്പ് വലിച്ച് ഒരു മുഴുവൻ പകലും മൊയന്തനായി ഇരുന്നത്, കല്ലുപോലെ ഉറങ്ങുമ്പോൾ കല്ലടിയനെ പറ്റി ആരോ പിറുപിറുത്ത വാക്കുകൾ ചെവിയിൽ വീണത്, കല്ലടിയൻ്റെ പണി നഗരത്തിൽ രാത്രിയിലാണ്, ദരിദ്രരുടെ വായിൽ നിന്ന് അടക്കിപ്പിടിച്ച വാക്കുകൾ അയാളെപ്പറ്റി പുറത്തു വന്നു.
Thank you very much. May I request the lights to be turned down a little bit? Really bright and really hot.
Yeah, it's hot.
Thank you so much. Nicer before,
Would you like to read from your book? Yeah.
I will. That's fine. Something for the mouth. Bombay, which obliterated its own history by changing its name and surgically altering its face, is the hero or heroine of this story. And since I'm the one who's telling it, and you don't know who I am, let me say that we'll get to the who of it, but not right now. Because now there's time enough not to hurry, to light the lamp and open the window to the moon and take a moment to dream of a great and broken city. Because when the day starts its business, I'll have to stop. These are nighttime tales that vanish in sunlight like vampire dust. Wait now. Light me up so we do this right. Yes, hold me steady to the lamp. Hold it. Hold. Good. A slow pull to start with, to draw the smoke low into the lungs. Yes, oh my. And another for the nostrils, and a little something sweet for the mouth. And now we can begin at the beginning with the first time at Rashid's when I stitched the blue smoke from pipe to blood to eye and out into the blue world. And now we're getting to the who of it. And I can tell you that the I you're imagining at this moment, a thinking someone who's writing these words, who's arranging time in a logical, chronological sequence, someone with an overall plan, an engineer God in the machine, well, that's not the I who's telling this story. That's the I who's being told, thinking of my first pipe at Rashid's, chawling my head for images, a face, a bit of music, or the sound of someone's voice, trying to remember what it was last, the past, recall it as I would the landscape and light of a foreign country, because that's what it is, not fiction or dead history, but a place you lived in once and cannot return to, which is why I'm trying to remember how it was that I got into trouble in New York and they sent me back to Bombay to get straight. How I found Rashid's, and how one afternoon I took a taxi through roads mined with garbage, with human and animal debris, and the poor, everywhere the poor and deranged stumbled in their rags or stood and stared, and I saw nothing out of the ordinary in their bare feet and air of abandonment. I smoked a pipe and I was sick all day, hearing whispers in my stone sleep about the Pattarmar, the stone killer.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, we are basically about a discussion on your new book. But definitely we cannot avoid the earlier one. And in both the books, I think the space, the city space comes as a common, very important space in the city as a very important space in both the books. And one is Bombay and the second one is Delhi, London. So, if I'm right, I think your city is totally different from most of the cities that we see in other writers, in a sense that your city is basically inside the minds of your characters. So, can you elaborate on your life in cities and your characters? Yeah.
Thanks, that's a great question. I think in Narcopolis, Bombay is as much of a character in the story as the hundreds of other characters. And the most recurring character. You see Bombay, it starts with the word Bombay and it ends with the word Bombay, the book. And you see how Bombay changes over 30 years. It begins as a very cosmopolitan, accepting, inclusive space. and it becomes a very intolerant, unaccepting, exclusive space. It changes from a kind of appreciation of difference to a kind of appreciation of similarity. And I think that's a kind of a changing of space and a changing of character that I was trying to record with Narcopolis.
Vijay Nampishan has once said, "Evenings of Mumbai has a language of poetry." The evenings of Mumbai has a language of poetry. I mean, the evenings along with his friends in Mumbai. So I think you are one among them, Dom Moraes and Dilip Chitre, Arun Kolakar, and you are all a good group. Can you give us some light on your evenings in Mumbai? Yeah.
Well, I mean, at the time, I didn't know it was a group, you know, and because Vijay and I were friends, but we took a long time to become friends.
Yeah.
Because he was a very solitary guy, and I was a pretty solitary person. And so we met and hung out, and we were in a book together, our first books, Gemini, we shared that book. But we were still, we were not friends at that time. We became friends much later, I think about 3 or 4 years after we met.
Yeah.
And another thing that we had in common was the fact that we both felt like outsiders in the world of the Bombay poets.
Yeah.
And one thing nobody tells you about the Bombay poets, about Jasawala and Mehrotra, and who was there very often, and Giv Patel and Yunus D'Souza and Kamala Das for a while. One thing no one tells you about these poets, they were not friendly. They were not welcoming. If you were a young, new poet, they wouldn't even talk to you, you know. So, I mean, it's very tempting right now to think of them and say how wonderful they were. They were really not. They were not wonderful at all. In fact, they were curmudgeons. You know, they were anti-social, you know.
And I think Dom Moraes was better, right?
He was the exception to that rule because he didn't care about how old you were. You could have been 22, but if he liked you, you were friends, you know. Whereas Adil was not like that. Nissim was not like that. You know, these were people who were very condescending at first to young poets and were helpful. They would be helpful. Like they would give, if you gave them poems, they would give you a critique, but it would be a devastating critique. It would destroy you. You know, it would leave you so depressed that you'd never want to write again. And maybe that was some kind of test. Like if you survived that initial experience of torture and torment, it meant that you had something to you, and you could then, you were then maybe allowed to enter the front gate, not the mittam, not the porch, not the front door, not the house, but the front gate of the house of poetry that the Bombay poets patrolled like angry dogs.
I think Kerala is not an exception. And in this book, The Chocolate Saints, I think it is a bit more political than your first book, Narcopolis. And when I went through the book, I could see especially Xavier's interview with Indira Gandhi, yeah, and which the authorities never wanted to promote a kind of art that they cannot, I mean, that is not supportive of them. And also there were discussions on partition issues, caste, especially the character Narayan Dose. Yeah, I wonder what is your take on that? I mean, whether a writer should indulge in artistic, no, in political activities or, yeah.
I mean, that's like asking whether a writer should indulge in the activity of breathing the air. How do you not? How do you keep yourself so removed from real life, especially in the kind of political climate that we live in today? How can you dissociate yourself from that, and how can you not somehow try to comment on it in your art? Because the people who run our country today, they really don't care about artists unless the artists compliment them and tell them how wonderful they are and act in a movie that praises them and that makes them look like heroes. If you don't do that, if you dissent, they will crush you. They will try to crush you. So actually it's the duty of the artist writing today or painting today or producing theater today to comment on this situation, because that's the only way we can do it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the third chapter of your book says, has such comments on how artists should be and what the writer, what is the, how a writer should be. Yeah, especially the third chapter of your book. And also, there are some differences between this new book and Narcopolis. It's basically a sense of humor. I mean, yeah. So I have noticed, I still remember some when NRI, when you say NRI, it is not really Indian. He says not really Indian. And yeah, there are quite a, and the spelling of POM, when Allen Ginsberg, you were talking about Ginsberg, and the spelling of POM is P-O-M-E in that book, yeah. So, and also it is really poetic. So, have you done a lot of editing, the process of editing here in this book? Yeah. Because you're a poet, and that's why I asked this question. You do, yeah.
In fact, this started out as a 850-page book. I deleted about 40,000 words, actually 45,000 words, and then made it less than 500 pages. And it's still a fat book, but I tried my best to edit it. In fact, the editing process was actually longer than the writing process. And the whole thing took about 6 years. Yeah, and I think it's a much better book for being leaner and tighter. Yeah.
And how many drafts?
Countless.
Okay.
Yeah, and luckily, you know, because you work digitally on a screen, there's no record of the number of drafts, and that's a wonderful thing, because if I had a record of all the drafts that I've done to get here, I would be really depressed, and I think I'd probably stop writing.
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, it has a rich poetic quality. And would you like to read a couple of poems from that book? Because you have, yeah, poems of inside that book, yeah.
Can you guys hear us? You can. You're sure, right?
And I have translated a couple. So initially he will read it, and then I'll translate. I'll read the translation in Malayalam.
This is a. In this book, there are certain historical figures as well as imaginary figures who have been made into saints, and they are the chocolate saints of the title. Chocolate in terms of skin color. So one of the chocolate saints in this book is Saint Gandhi. Saint Gandhi of Porbandar in darker South Africa saw the light when traveling by train, wore only homespun, gave up salt and sex. So tragic a man who split a nation in two, befriended apocalypse, died with the name of God on his lips, shot by a man with God in his name. Just one thing about this poem. The rhyme scheme is A-B-B-A. And something I had a lot of fun with was the rhyme Africa and tragic. Oh, you don't need it.
I'll read the Malayalam version. ഗാന്ധി പുണ്യവാളൻ. പോർബന്തറിൽ നിന്ന് ഇരുണ്ട ദക്ഷിണാഫ്രിക്കയിൽ ഒരു തീവണ്ടിയിൽ വെച്ച് വെളിച്ചം കണ്ടവൻ, സ്വയം നെയ്ത വസ്ത്രം മാത്രം ധരിച്ചവൻ, ഉപ്പും കാമവും ത്യജിച്ചവൻ, ദുഃഖം ബാക്കി വെച്ച ഒരു മനുഷ്യൻ, രാജ്യത്തെ രണ്ടായി മുറിച്ചവൻ, മഹാദുരന്തത്തോട് സൗഹൃദപ്പെട്ടവൻ, മരണനേരം രാമനാമം ചുണ്ടോട് ചേർത്തവൻ, രാമൻ നാമത്തിലുള്ളവനാൽ മരണപ്പെട്ടവൻ. ഇതിൽ രാമൻ എന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല, അതിൽ ഗോഡ് എന്നായിരുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ഗോഡ് എന്നുള്ളത് ഗോഡ്സെ ആ ഒരു സെൻസിലായിരുന്നു ഗോഡ് എന്ന്. അത് മലയാളത്തിലേക്ക് ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ രാമൻ. കാരണം എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ ഈ അയാളുടെ ഫുൾ നെയിം നാഥുറാം ഗോഡ്സെ, അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് രാമൻ എന്ന് വെച്ചത്.
When Godse shot him, he said Ram as he was dying.
That's why I said.
Thank you. I understand Malayalam enough to know that that was a beautiful translation. Thank you.
Thank you. And like to read Santosh. So initially I'll read another poem from this book. സന്തോഷ് പുണ്യവാളൻ. ഓട്ടക്കാരുടെയും നാവികരുടെയും കമിതാക്കളുടെയും വിശുദ്ധൻ, കൊള്ളയടിക്കപ്പെട്ടവരുടെയും നിലവിട്ടുപോയവരുടെയും ശബ്ദം വിദേശ നഗരത്തിൽ സ്വയം കണ്ടെത്തിയവൻ, ജീൻസുകളും താളങ്ങളും ആസ്വദിക്കുന്നവൻ, കേരള റിപ്പബ്ലിക്കിലെ കാൽപന്തു താരം, എൻ്റെ ഗുദത്തിൽ ചുംബിക്കൂ എന്ന ആപ്തവാക്യം ചുവരുകളിലൂടെയും കെട്ടുകഥകളിലൂടെയും ചെണ്ട കൊട്ടിയും വിളിച്ചു പറഞ്ഞവൻ.
Saint Santosh. Saint Santosh of runners, sailors, romancers, voice of the robbed and drowned, found himself in a foreign town, distracted by the eyes of dancers. Enjoyer of denim and rhythm, soccer star of the Republic of Kerala, whose motto, "Kiss my posterior," is repeated in graffito, lore and drum. Which has the unusual rhyme Kerala and posterior.
Oh yeah. So in this book, I have noticed one important thing. The conversation of Professor Rauer, and he was talking about Allen Ginsberg while in Bombay scene. I think the beat writers often come in this book, and Rauer says that he doesn't like the beats because they were all Orientalists, and also in that Saviour's bathroom scene, and when he was drawing a naked woman in the bathroom and he was expelled from his college. And Allen Ginsberg, he wrote something in the bathroom and then he was expelled from college. So I could see the connection between Ginsberg and Xavier. Yeah.
I didn't know that connection.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And of course, I know that you love Baudelaire, Charles Baudelaire, and I wonder whether you were influenced by the Beat Generation writers, and if so, which aspect? Yeah.
Now I'm very embarrassed to say I was influenced by the Beats, because it's just the most obvious thing for a young man to say that he was influenced by, the Beats, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs. It's just so typical, and I'm embarrassed, but it's true. I was, I think, very deeply influenced. But then I think some of the kind of ambivalent attitude to the Beats in this book. Yeah. In fact, there's a lot of criticism about the Beats. Calling them fakes, calling them Orientalists, saying that they were, even the bohemianism was a kind of an act.
Yeah.
All of that might be a reaction to the fact that once I liked them too much.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I think, you know, becoming an adult is learning to distance yourself a little bit, at least, from the attitudes of your teenage years or your boyhood, you know. And I think really the beats probably should remain in your teenage years and your, you know, early 20s.
Yeah. And also, I mean, they liked Urdu poets better than the English poets in Mumbai. Yeah.
In fact, that's based on a true story. When the Beats, when Allen Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky read in Bombay on a terrace in Kolaba with some of the Indian English poets, including Nizam Ezekiel and Adil Jasawala and R. Parthasarathi, and some Urdu poets, they all read on the same evening. And when the Indian poets writing in English finished, the Beats were really insulting to them and said they were terrible poets. They wrote derivative poetry. They were useless. Peter Orlovsky actually went up to R. Parthasarathi and said, and I'm quoting word for word, he said, "If we was gangster poets, we would shoot you, man." Whereas when the Urdu poets read, they were saying, "Wow, fantastic, amazing," although they didn't understand a word of Urdu. So that tells you a lot about what kind of Orientalists the Beats were, you know.
And in connection with the beat, I would like to ask you about the Hung realists and the hungry generation in Bengal. All these Malai Roy Chowdhury and Debbie Roy. And in that book, you were saying that they took this name from Narayan Dosh. Is it right?
It's actually a joke,
Yeah.
which I'm not surprised, but Malay has not taken very well. He's criticized it on, in fact, he got really angry about it on Facebook. But it's just a harmless joke, you know. I just said that the name Hungryalists, which is Hungryan, as in Hungryalists, was a mishearing of hung realists, because Allen Ginsberg thought the Bengali poets were well hung, and he called them Hungryalists, and somebody heard that as Hungryalists. It's just a silly joke, but I had fun doing it. Apparently the Hungryalist poets didn't like it at all.
And in this book, you were talking about the writers abroad, the national feeling of the writers abroad and the writers in homeland. Yeah. So, is it a part of this diasporic identity, that rootlessness or hybridity, whatever we call it? So, what is the basic difference between a writer here, I mean, in India, write about their motherland, and writer abroad?
Yeah, I've been both. I was once abroad for many years.
Yeah.
Then I came back to India about 15 years ago.
Yes. So you must be knowing both the scenes.
I think I probably do. I think what I can say about not just Indian writers abroad, but Asian writers abroad, is that they end up creating and belonging to a kind of a ghetto. So you create an Indian ghetto of writers, and then you join that ghetto and you stay there. And you talk about yourself as a South Asian writer, whereas actually you're a writer, you know. Why should you paint yourself into such a tiny spot? And it's amazing how so many Indian writers in the US, for example, call themselves South Asian writers. As if they're on some small table in the corner of the room. They don't belong on the big table with the real writers, you know. And I think it's understandable why they do it, because otherwise it's difficult to be heard or to be seen. So you put yourself a label on yourself. And one great thing about being an Indian writer in India is that you don't have to do that, you know.
So what about calling you an Indian English writer?
I reject that label.
Okay.
I'm an Indian writer.
Okay, yeah.
Whatever language you write in, you're an Indian writer, and the language that you write in becomes obvious in the context. So it's irrelevant. Why should we get into that? It doesn't matter. And English is as much an Indian language today as any other language.
Yeah, you were talking about this idea in this book that Christianity is an Indian religion and English is an Indian language. Yes. And can you talk about the pressure of publishing industry? Because you said you stopped writing poems and now you are not going to publish any poems. Yeah, and pressure of publishing industry in writing a novel. Yeah.
Well, I didn't stop writing poetry because of pressure from the publishing industry or because, you know, I wanted to write novels because it was a better publishing decision. I stopped writing poetry because I wrote a book that I think, even now, I haven't written poems in about 3 years. I stopped because I wrote a book that I felt was the best that I can do in terms of poetry. I can never write a book. I might write a poem perhaps, but never a book that's better than that book, which is These Errors Are Correct. It was written in the aftermath of my wife's death. And I know that I can never equal that book. So and I believe that if you can't equal a book or do something better, it's better not to try, you know, and that's why I write novels. Also, I think if you call yourself a writer, and that's your only job, and it is my only job, unlike you, I don't teach, you know, I have no other means of income. This is my job and my life.
And here I think very few people can write poems and at the same time, yeah.
Sure, and if you're a writer, why shouldn't you write or try to write different things? You know, why couldn't you try and write a play or a libretto or a novel? You know, there's no rule that says a poet must only write poetry. In fact, some of the great novels have been written by poets, you know.
Anyway, we were discussing about poetry, so I will read one of his poems, which I translated recently. And a couple of my students, friends were helping me, especially Kartika and Maria. I thank them to translate this, yeah. The title of the poem is New Year Goa. So, would you like to read this poem after I read? Yeah. Puduvarsham, Goa. പാതിരാവിൻ്റെ തിമിരക്കണ്ണുകൾ വെളുക്കുന്നു. ഇവിടെ ഇതാ കടൽ ചീറ്റുന്നത് ഇടറുന്ന വ്യഞ്ജനാക്ഷരം. തളിർമുദ്രകൾ അണിഞ്ഞ് നീ നിലാവിനെ പിന്തുടരുന്നു. തീരത്തണഞ്ഞ ജടപടർന്ന തലചുറ്റലോ സ്വാതന്ത്ര്യമോ ആയ മുറിയിലേക്ക്, ഓർമ്മകൾ പോലെ ചുരുങ്ങുന്ന ഇടത്തേക്ക് ചെറുദീപങ്ങൾ വിളക്കുമരത്തിലേക്ക് പിടിച്ചു കയറുന്നു. 32 മാളികകൾ ബോധിസത്വൻ്റേത്. ചർമ്മപാത്രം പോലെ മിനുസമുള്ള ജലത്തിൽ പൊങ്ങുതടി പോലെ വിറയ്ക്കുന്ന നാളങ്ങൾ. ഈ രാത്രി ഈച്ചകൾ പൊതിഞ്ഞ പോലെ മനസ്സ് അസ്വസ്ഥമാണ് എങ്കിലും അവനും സമ്മതമാണ് നിന്റെ കിറുക്കൻ പദ്ധതികളോട്. ഈ രാത്രി ഈച്ചകൾ പൊതിഞ്ഞ പോലെ മനസ്സ് അസ്വസ്ഥമാണെങ്കിലും അവനും സമ്മതമാണ് നിന്റെ കിറുക്കൻ പദ്ധതികളോട്. മുൻപിൽ ഭൂതകാലവും മൺമറഞ്ഞ അതിപ്രശസ്ത നഗരവുമായി നിന്നെ ഒടുക്കം കടലിൽ അലയാൻ വിട്ട് അപ്രത്യക്ഷമായ കൽക്കെട്ടുകളിലേക്ക് നടക്കുന്ന ഈ തീർത്ഥാടനത്തെക്കാൾ ഭ്രാന്തമായി ഇല്ല മറ്റൊന്നും.
Thank you. Beautiful translation.
Thank you. Would you like to read that?
Sure. You have the English?
Yeah.
New Year, Goa. The midnight's cataracts whiten, and here's the sea hissing its one stuttered consonant. Leaf printed, you track the moon to a beached, bearded hull, a room of vertigo or freedom that narrows like memory. Small flames ascend of tree of light. The 32 palaces of Bodhisattvam tremble on the vellum, smooth water like flotsam. If tonight the mind is queasy, drawing thoughts like flies, he is fine too with every crazy scheme you devise, none crazier than this pilgrimage to appear that seems to have disappeared, leaving you sea-born at last, ahead of you the past and all its famous cities lost.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. You read poems really well.
So do you.
And you perform as well. I mean, you have a band.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So, and you were reading in Brisbane recently, in Australia. And Brisbane has a strong culture of performance poetry, especially so many young groups there. Yeah. So, I wonder, what is your take on the contemporary performance poetry in India? Because in Kerala, I think there were a couple of poetry slams happened in Trivandrum. But other than that, there were not much. I mean, though there is a long tradition of poets reading, yes, there is, but not performance poetry in its new terms. So, of course, in cities, Indian cities, we have. So, what is your take on that? Yeah.
I mean, I have nothing against performance poetry, against spoken word poetry, against jazz poetry, against, there's so many kind of names for what we originally called oral poetry, and all poetry at one time was oral. It was spoken. It was, which is where the word bard comes from. The bardic tradition of standing in front of a group of people and saying poems. There's something beautiful about that. But the current incarnation of that, which is 20 people getting up on stage and reading in this very typical kind of cadence, I'm just not that interested in that, and I no longer do it. And I'm bored because everybody sounds the same. And the worst thing is when after the reading, when the audience applauds like this, like that, sort of, you have to imagine 40 people doing that instead of clapping, and that'll make you never want to attend one of those sessions again. Sorry if I've offended anybody.
Yeah. So maybe now we will open the discussion for the audience. Yeah. So I welcome questions. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Actually, you talked about the way Bombay poets received young poets. So, how was the reception when you stepped into the world of fiction?
I think it was much more welcoming than when I tried to step into the world of poetry. where there was a lot of resistance, for a long time, before you could even identify yourself as a poet. This is at that time in Bombay, in the 80s, before social media, when people lived very isolated, especially poets, they lived very isolated lives, I remember, I'm not going to say who this was, but when I first introduced myself to one of the Bombay poets, I was so nervous about, or so shy about saying that I was a poet, that I lied to him and said I wrote fiction. Because I thought if I told him I wrote poetry, he wouldn't like it, and I think I was right. So, and at the time I didn't write fiction, I lied and said I wrote fiction, which of course was a lie that came true 30 years later.
Hello, sir. So, from this answer, are we to assume that the poets have a narcissistic trait?
I think, it's a kind of a contradiction, but I think it's true. Poets do have a narcissistic kind of sense, because why else would you write poems? It's the most, and I think you'll agree with me on this, it's the most unthankful profession in the world. Nobody cares. Nobody gives you anything in return. You make no money from it. There's never any chance of fame until you're dead. There's never any question of, for example, being invited to a festival like this one. Poets are not invited unless, of course, you're Seamus Heaney or a Nobel Prize winner. But generally, poets live a much, much harder life than other writers in other forms. And I think the only reason for this is, one, they're slightly crazy. In fact, maybe quite demented. Why else would you do it? And two, because you have to have a kind of a sense and a belief in yourself that is so powerful that not even the slings and arrows of the world can diminish it. And I think that might be another word for narcissism.
So, as a staunch follower of you, I would like to ask that you said you stopped poetry because you felt it was the best ever poetry you have written. I would like to ask that each time, everyone says each time you write, you get better and better. And how could you limit your ability? Like, you say it is the best you have written, you can't write any more better.
You mean you get better as a writer, so why would you stop? Is that what you mean? Well, there was the French poet, I think it was Verlaine, although I might be wrong, who said that poems are never finished, they're abandoned. I think that applies also to the career of a poet. It's never finished, you just abandon it at some point. But my answer to that question is the things that I learned when I was writing poetry, and it took me a long time to become good at poetry. I started off as quite a bad poet. My early poems, now when I look at them, I get very embarrassed. It took me at least 30 years to become good at poems. But I think those skills that you learn when you are writing poems and reading poems and thinking about making yourself a good poet, all those skills that you pick up and the lessons you learn, I think come in very handy whatever you write, whether it's prose, whether it's letters, or whether it's a report for a business house.
Hello.
have you read any interpretations of your poetry that surprised you or horrified you? And who do you think is an overrated poet?
I think I already have enough enemies, so I'm not going to answer the last question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
But the first part of your question.
I think you said Tagore is much overrated. Yeah.
Yeah, I
and
did
Vijay
say that.
Nabishan is underrated.
Yeah,
Recently.
actually, I think that might be safe to say that in Kerala.
Yeah, it is.
Tagore is an overrated poet. I would never say this in Bengal because I'd be attacked physically. People would be throwing stones or at least shoes from the audience. But I think it's safe to say it here. Tagore was a great artist, but only when you put all his different talents together. He was a painter. He was a great short story writer. He was an okay poet. He was an okay songwriter. Definitely overrated as a poet, because when you read some of those poems, and you can't blame the translator, he did the translation himself. For example, one of his most famous lines that every school kid has to learn, as I had to learn, when the head is held high and the mind is without fear. If you say those words to yourself, it's very clear that that's not poetry, it's prose. So, you know, this is my view. You don't have to agree with me. I don't want to offend any Bengalis in the audience, but I think he's overrated, but only as a poet, not as an artist. And about interpretations of my poems that have surprised or horrified me, that happens quite often, but I really try not to feel bad about it or feel good about it, because once you write a poem, it doesn't belong to you. Once it's in print, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whoever reads it. And every one of those interpretations is as valid as what you thought yours was when you wrote the poem.
Yeah. And I think we cannot control people interpreting it, because it's all, yeah.
In the book of Chocolate Saints, your writing is like so many different people. You've got Narayan Das, you've got this Russian poet. Your writing is, you're speaking as Dismas Bambai. He's going and interviewing different people. And all these people, some of them are actual people who existed, and the rest of them are fictional. So how did you put yourself in the mentality to write as all these different people?
Thank you. Good question. When I was working on this book, especially the section you're talking about, which, by the way, is only 1/3 of the book. The section about the Bombay poets. The other 2/3 of the book are totally to do with other things and set in different parts of the world. So I don't want to give the wrong idea, but the sections about the Bombay poets, while I was working on it, I realized that what I wanted to do was write it like it was journalism about people who actually exist. And many of the figures are based on people I knew. Of course, they've been fictionalized completely, but they were based on people I knew. They were often stories I'd heard, and all those stories that I heard, I kept the real names. My father, the writer T.J.S. George, is one of the people who is interviewed in that section, because he actually told me that story about Domarays. So I asked his permission, and I said, may I use it, and may I use your name? And he said yes. I did the same with the poet Philip Nikolaev, except that a lot of the character Philip Nikolaev, a lot of that stuff is fiction, except for one 4-line passage where his character is talking about flowers, about how flowers are beheaded and used in Bengal for different ceremonies. That he actually said at one point. And again, I wrote to him and I said, I'd like to use that as well as fictionalize a character, and may I use your name? He said yes. So there are many real names in this book, as well as many invented names. And my mission was to write it in such a way that you, the reader, would not know which are the real characters and which are the invented characters. That was the point of it.
Anyone else?
ഹലോ, ഈ ചടങ്ങുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് ചില കാര്യങ്ങൾ പറയണം എന്ന് മുൻകൂട്ടി ഉദ്ദേശിച്ചിരുന്നു. ചോദ്യമായിട്ട് ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടാ പറയുന്നത്. അതെന്ത് പരിപാടിയാ? ആ പ്രോഗ്രാമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടാ പറയുന്നത്. ഈ ശ്രദ്ധിക്കണം സാർ, DC ബുക്സ് ആണ് ഇത്തരമൊരു പരിപാടിയുടെ സംഘാടകർ പ്രാഥമികമായിട്ട് എന്നാണ് മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത്. എന്നാ ഇയാൾ സംസാരിച്ചോളൂ, ഇയാൾ ഇങ്ങനെ ഇടയ്ക്കിടയ്ക്ക് ഇന്റർപ്രറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നു. പിന്നെ നിങ്ങൾ സംസാരിച്ച പോലെ പിന്നെ ഞാൻ വേണോ? ആ വിഷയമായിട്ട് ഞാൻ സംസാരിച്ചു തുടങ്ങിയില്ല. അതിനിടയ്ക്ക് വർത്താനം പറയും. ഇയാൾക്ക് മൈക്ക് വിട്ട് കൊടുത്ത് യൂത്ത് ഫെസ്റ്റിവൽ അല്ല, വെറും യൂത്ത് ഫെസ്റ്റിവൽ ആണെന്ന് മാത്രമേ എനിക്ക് പറയാനുള്ളൂ.
I don't know how to answer that question. I think I'll think about it overnight and maybe formulate a reply by tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll come back to this. We were talking about collecting materials and then writing. So you were a journalist earlier, yeah. So, and I think it was your father who said not to be a journalist, but to become a writer, yeah. So, how far you are, and in this book you are mocking the English newspapers who wanted to celebrate a Hollywood, an Indian who got a chance to appear in a Hollywood movie, and then, yeah. So, how was your experience as a journalist, and has it really helped you in becoming a writer? Or I was talking about the discipline aspect, yeah.
I hope so, because otherwise I would be very, very depressed. I was a journalist for 23 years. And I think of that now, 23 years is a long, long time. And when I think of that now, I think of it as wasted time. And the only way to make it tolerable, to make it bearable in my own head, is to think that during those years, I maybe picked up some skills to do with compression, to do with accuracy, and to do with training the ear to pick up the rhythms of speech. And I hope that those lessons are now translated into fiction.
This could be the last question. So the time is over. In this book, you says, if a nation does not care for its past, it does not care for its future. And I think you echo Churchill there. And you continue saying that if it does not care for poets, it does not care for anything at all. Yeah. So, how do you think a state should treat writers or poets? And can you give us an example?
I think Kerala is one of the few states in the world that actually gives its writers the admiration and respect that they deserve. Because literature is a part of Kerala, a fabric of social life in Kerala. the fabric of social life in Kerala. And you can tell by this audience here, it is not the kind of audience that you would find at, say, the Jaipur festival, you know, which is a very typical kind of, very typically, you know, elitist audience. This is an audience drawn from all sections of society in Kerala, and it can only happen in Kerala, you know.
So with this question, we wind up, and I thank you for being here, talking to us, sharing your thoughts, and I thank the audience for being here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.